I have on occasion been critical of how the OSR community has evolved in the sense that it has become more and more about a BX D&D experience or a white box D&D experience, the more basic editions. If it began with Osric and Labyrinth Lord in 2006, and Osric was sort of a first edition AD&D game, and Labyrinth Lord was a derivative of BX, particularly Moldvay BX, and I've become more educated on the topic. If I've been critical of OSR as a tag and as an idea in the past, it's been the fact that it's sort of become more and more exclusive towards minimalist gaming and inclusivity towards RuneQuest and Dungeon Crawl Classics and Rollmaster and other kind of thicker games that, you know, as the complex games apologist, I may have some nostalgia for, or I think there are some ideas within them that might be worth reviving. I have been critical of those in the past. And let me get off my my silly headset because there's no use for it right now. After all, I have this big old binder, which is my copy of Hackmaster, which I've put in protective covers. And Hackmaster is a first edition AD&D parody and derivative, and it's one of the first RPGs that I cut my teeth on, and I had a lot of joy in running. So, you know, if there's anything that I have a critique for, it's that things have moved towards minimalism, and that there's been maybe a little bit of over time an idea that there's some sort of puritanical, or that there's adulterations being introduced into Gary's original vision, or into the kind of the innocent Stranger Things kids on bikes version of D&D, and that along came over the years an accumulation of stuff which adulterated whatever was great about the old D&D. And I just put a picture on the screen here of Ron Edwards' very long talk on the topic of sort of the mythology and the way that he constructs the idea of why the OSR has some of the feelings in that direction that it does. But that has nothing at all to do with politics, with notions of anti-LGBT stuff, notions of that there's kind of a large degree of sexism or hostility towards issues which some people describe as social justice. And, you know, I'm generally try to stay apolitical on this channel, and I don't involve myself in a lot of the Twitter wars out there that have been going on in RPG world. But I think that it's time, because most notably because of this game and the kind of some of the humans associated with it, the one in the lower corner of your screen, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, that I think it's time to disambiguate the OSR tag as far as when it comes to these notions, specifically about that kind of stuff. So Lamentations of the Flame Princess has become, in recent years, the most dominant of the BX D&D derived OSR games. And a good friend of mine, Ivan Pogwait, who has the channel Ivan Mike 1968, his actual play continues to go on. I think it's Lamentations of the Martian Princess. And as far as I can tell, it's a great BX-derived game. It does have, as far as its art style, as far as its aesthetic, as far as the adventures that it goes into it, there's a lot of body horror, there's a lot of sexual horror. It is an 18-plus game. They go towards the grindhouse side of OSR, the white box era, and kind of the era when the game was being played by adults that had picked up the game, soldiers on deployment in Germany, and adults within the wargaming culture, just, you know, people who, in the process of passing around whatever sort of water pipe and substance which was being combusted within it in the late 70s, also picked up D&D as an activity that they shared with their friends. My understanding is that, you know, there was a grindhouse aesthetic to that, and there was a little bit of... it found some congruence with the sort of fantasy fiction which was fueling some of the Appendix N era of stuff. So specifically, you know, you start with Conan, and there is this sort of there's a lot of there's a little bit of kind of that stuff going on as far as a grindhouse aesthetic, as far as damsels and I really don't want to get into it, besides to say that the apex of that is gore, GOR, which is, of course, a very weird piece of fantasy literature. And that's where the furthest it goes. But as far as Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I mean, I think there's a wide palette of kind of what it represents. And James Raggi, as the person who is the kind of the brand manager, and he's the guy who does Lamentations. He's the main guy, and he's published Zach S. And as you know, Zach S. has kind of gone through a kind of a lot of scandal recently. And I'm not going to describe who Zach S. is in this particular stream if you don't know already, but suffice it to say, Raggi, who is the guy who makes Lamentations go, during the early years of the Zach S. controversies, didn't dissociate himself with Zach S. And Zach S. has made several Lamentations adventures. And during those years, going back to 2015, I think, Raggi also said that he wouldn't overtly blacklist or dissociate himself from Varg Vikernes, Thulian Perspective, the guy who makes the My Frog game that is, I think is pretty obviously overtly an allegory for the replacement narrative, which is very popular with white supremacists and that sort of folks. And I make no bones about it. I think that that's what My Frog's about. And so Raggi didn't say, oh, I'll never work with Varg ever. And I think he was trying to say, effectively that if this guy wants to make an adventure for my game, if this guy wants to publish stuff, under my label, then he was open to that. And I understand the idea that, you're not going to do the hashtag canceled thing. That's very popular. This idea that there's a scorched earth, that once somebody's committed a wrong in the eyes of social activism, then they never get to have a job again. Their stuff should be, very vocally buried and so on. And I understand that is sort of a activism technique, but kind of the idea of associating through guilt by association, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and a lot of the rest of OSR, with the noxious ideas of Varg, I think that's a reach. And likewise, the idea of associating OSR with people who are misogynists, people who are abusers, like Zach S. has proven to be. I don't even want to say proven. There's been very compelling accusations that have come out about Zach, and we knew that he was kind of a bad guy from his behavior online before that. And suffice it to say, yeah, Zach made some adventures for Lamentations. Yes, some of his aesthetic, which includes sort of sexual weirdness and sort of kind of a kinky ick to his adventures, Vornheim and Maze of the Blue Medusa. Both of those adventures, I think that you kind of can detect some of the nature of Zach's character in them, but nevertheless, they were adventures for a role-playing game, which you can take to your table and you can play, and it doesn't make you into a sick person for even liking his art, okay? Like, you can say it's good. I never thought it was good. I thought Vornheim was, really not particularly great. I did not tickle my funny bone. There are many great city books. Midchemia Presses, Midchemia as in Raymond D. Feist. Very long ago, they put out this cities book, which has a lot of city generation tables in it. And I have a copy of it by some miracle. And it's about as old school as it comes. About 1983 is the vintage on that one. And it does everything that Vornheim claims to do, but feels much more rich and alive with this vintage feeling. And for me, when it comes down to what the OSR tag is, the OSR tag is about a vintage feeling. Regardless, then this is my own opinion. Now, I know that there have been folks who have pushed it towards this minimalism, this idea that it's all about the white box, it's all about the kids on bikes, and it's before all those rules lawyers got in there and so on. And, I just don't buy that personally. And as far as the charm and the reason that I would ever associate anything that I did with OSR, and I'm not allergic to that label personally. Here's my copy of Hackmaster, And when I run it on my channel, I will put OSR tags on it. And, I will go around trying to, revive Kenzer and Company's triumph of parody and also a very playable, fun game. That'll be me. That's vintage stuff. So Swords and Wizardry, of course, is the most kind of furthest reaches of the minimalism. And it's a great jumping off point because James Spahn, a great guy, has made all of that under an open game license. And so people using the Swords and Wizardry open game license can publish stuff that is, without having to pay royalties, that is compatible with other OSR products, with white box stuff. And, you can go off and make your own game that is derived from that, using that open game license. And so James Spahn has already done us a solid with that. And then also, I think on one of the special editions of Swords and Wizardry's core rulebook, to my knowledge, they had all women artists do all the art within this particular Swords and Wizardry volume. And Ivan Mike has a great unboxing and a little flip through, I think, of Swords and Wizardry edition that has that kind of strong move towards inclusion of artists who happen to be women. As far as the inclusion projects, and I understand there's a lot of differing opinions on the topic of like the idea that, you didn't give everyone a fair shake or a fair opportunity to apply for the job if you say, I only want this kind of person. And I understand that may be a line of reasoning. Frankly, like I don't think that that's wrong exactly, but I think that, it's the prerogative of someone making a piece of art and making publishing a book that if they want to make a theme, including the theme that it was done by a certain kind of people, that's them. That's their sole prerogative as the person making the book. And I applaud James Spahn for the work that he did and kind of staying fast. Maybe he endured a lot of criticism. And this is one of the things that I want to talk about, is that the OSR has a lot of punditry. It has a great deal of punditry. And, that's funny because the RPG pundit, who I think is known, he has a real name. It's like Jeffrey Tarnowski, I think. And, he's a center of controversy. He constantly stirs up stuff on Twitter and people hate him. And then the Twitter warriors tried to get him blacklisted. They tried to get him erased from the credits of 5th edition D&D along with Zach S. Because he's mean and occasionally he uses like sort of transphobic words and so on and stuff like that. And he's mean. But I mean, they hired him. Like, he is a part of 5th edition D&D. You can't scratch it out. I mean, to me, if I would critique anything about some of this stuff that, like the people who want to blacklist, and this is an aside about RPG pundit Tarnowski, it's trying to scratch out the memory that Zach S. and Tarnowski ever existed is not going to change the fact that they did. And, if we want to be vigilant and, if we want to try and be more inclusive or hire different consultants like James Spahn, Eric Bloat, who's also a good guy who, I'm occasionally have conversations with Eric Bloat. He does the Survive This games, which are part of the OSR sphere. Dark Places and Demogorgons, which is kind of the first OSR game to kind of embrace the kids on bikes, Stranger Things aesthetic. He's a great guy too. So, you could have hired him instead of pundit, so next time maybe Wizard of the Coast might not commit the same, error of what kind of OSR consultants they want to hire. You can't change that by scratching out their name from the book. If you want to make everybody forget that ever happened, that's the thing that'll happen. And I don't know how we can learn from the past, of how we can learn from history if we erase it. Below the Swords and Wizardry logo on the current screen, there's this OSR logo, which seems to be indicative, and I found it deep in the depths of the creepier parts of 4chan. Yes, I have been there. It is a website that you can access with your web browser, and it doesn't make me a dirty person. But this does seem to be aesthetically created, this particular version of the OSR logo, that sure does look like an SS, like a German SS thing. And it does suggest that maybe some people are trying to carpetbag into the OSR tag or use it as code. But you know what? I don't think that if you asked my friends, Ivan, Eric Bloat, James Spahn, who, you know, I wrote a negative review about his White Star role-playing game. All these guys, I don't think that they are white supremacists. I don't think that they're transphobic or sexist, or that they really want anything to do with the sort of alarmism and pitchfork wielding and stuff that Jeremy Hambley, the guy who does the Quartering channel, and there's a whole bunch of YouTube channels who want to kind of bring up this idea that, oh, gaming is being ruined by the social justice warriors. And as far as I can tell, this is manufactured outrage. And that's kind of the thing that I want to culminate in, is that if there is anything to be said about these personalities, these pundits that are associated with OSR, yes, they might be looking to people who are nostalgic. They might be looking to people who are just naturally older and might, you know, have their ears more open to that stuff, but they just want watch time. They want blog views. That's what the pundit wants. I mean, Pundit has made his War of the Roses game, and he made Arrows of Indra, which is, you know, also just generally another OSR D&D derived. They're both D&D basically in alternate settings. So he's not really busy making content. He's busy blogging. And that's the content that he makes. He makes stuff for people to read and be angry. And that's what I mean to say is that there are people who make OSR tabloids. There are people who are just generally like kind of just using emotions and not creating content. And then there are great people making stuff in the OSR, like James Spahn. You know, as much as I didn't like White Star, as much as I didn't feel it was particularly honest to call it a science fiction RPG, I think James Spahn's putting out a ton of great stuff. I think that Eric Bloat is putting out a ton of great stuff. I think that it's been shown to me that as far as the versions of BX D&D, Lamentations is the most playable and the best presented one. And, you know, James Raggi might be an awkward character. He might stand for some things that I don't exactly stand for, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to blacklist or boycott his game necessarily. As far as the memory of the bad stuff that Zach did and his adventures, which I always felt were so-so, and his art, which I never thought was particularly stimulating, well, yeah, he exists. I don't think that he represents what OSR does. And this is mainly the thing that I want to kind of hammer home. And that's the point of this entire discussion, is that there are going to be bad actors that are going to use tags that are open. I mean, the OSR tag, after all, is the most open thing ever. As Osric, the very, you know, one of the earliest versions of OSR, is, you know, it was a free download. And the OSR logo has always been open source. And yes, there are bad actors. Yes, there are tabloid people who, you know, want to monetize or otherwise, you know, take advantage of people's emotions to kind of drive views, basically. I don't think that they represent the totality of the community. And a lot of people who are busy playing, who are busy writing, they really just don't have time. They're not really engaged with that kind of content. Like, I think that if you're busy playing OSR games, it's not particularly likely that you are also have a great deal of attachment and engagement with RPG pundit stuff. I don't think that you're really on the drama train, is what I mean to say. You're either playing the game and enjoying it for what it is and, you know, invested in the hobby, or, you know, I think that these guys, you know, especially Hambley, who, you know, he got kicked out of Magic the Gathering. He's got a lifetime ban from that. And it seems like he's just trying to find any part of the gaming world to latch onto to bring his brand of manufactured outrage. And, you know, I get a fair amount of comments on my channel here from people who are very upset about Pathfinder 2 and so on. And it's very clear that they just watched some video where some guy like revved them up about like how debauched things were and so on. And you know what? I think that there are those people who are revving up people to be angry. And there, there's certain people who I'm sure are. But what does OSR represent? I think it just represents vintage gaming. It represents some nostalgia. It's the same thing as like making a movie on film. It's the same thing as taking a picture with an old-fashioned mechanical camera. I think that it's the idea of doing math on pen and paper, or with a protractor, instead of with a computer. If you find that charming, if you think that there's still some good feeling to basically working with your hands or working with the tools that prior generations of people within your trade worked with, if you find resonance personally with that, then I think that's what OSR really represents, to me especially. And that's purely opinion. But, I have written up a random encounter table and rolled on it. I have stocked a dungeon full of monsters, and I have dutifully sort of run the party through them with no attention to story and letting the game unfold and letting the transcript of events be the story. And I've found great value in understanding that way of gaming. And it doesn't speak anything ill. I don't hate Star Trek Adventures and scenes and reversals and the idea that the episode has to get over with, i.e. narrative gaming in its various forms. I don't hate that. I don't think that they're completely uncompatible, but they're different. They're as different as using a calculator as, using pen and paper to do math. Is one better? I'm not here to make that normative distinction because I'm having fun doing both. And, and meanwhile, there's a lot of tribal stuff. There's a lot of tribal stuff on the OSR side, with Pundit and people who are like him. And I know that a while back there was a lot of people that kind of congregated or blogged on Vox Day's website, whatever that's called. I forget. He has a publishing house, and there's some further to the right people that were making OSR stuff. And, there's lots of sky is falling people. And then there's the people who, want the kind of the pitchfork wielding, like blacklist somebody forever, guilty by association, the Twitter types. There seems to be a different side of things, on the more modern gaming. But you know what? None of it has to do with actual gameplay, game mechanics, making stuff, writing adventures. I think very little of that is actually political. And so there's a lot of noise, but then there's the gaming, which I love. So I hope that you will be tuned in for my review of Pathfinder 2, which will be coming up later in the summer as it comes out. I have mixed feelings about it. I'm going to take the tack of how I would have done things differently. I'm going to take the tack of what is this game for? Why would you play this game instead of another game? Is there an answer to that question? Those are the sorts of things that I'm going to be confronting as I cover Pathfinder 2. But I thought that it was important for me to kind of get my voice in there about what is the OSR tag? It's vintage gaming. I hope you have a great afternoon. I'm going to take a little minute to take a look at Stream Chat because I think people have been hanging out here. So Sean Hillman is the main guy hanging out. So I'm just going to read a couple things and reply to them because it's fun. The problem with the OSR is not the nostalgia. It is firmly the idea that there are a number of bad actors who harbor under the OSR banner. Yeah, so I think we're in alignment there. There are bad actors across the spectrum of RPG. It's it does seem that we're generally in alignment about this, and it's if your eyes are on the gaming, if your eyes are on escapism, if you want to play games, the time that you have for this kind of stuff is a little bit contracted relative to other folks. So I have come across some strange artifacts like the survey put out by Brendan S. and Ben a few months ago. I'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, so OSR fetishizes D&D over everything else. It's a trend that got going, and, they seem to kick out all the RuneQuest types and so on. But I don't think that has a great deal of bearing on the political sort of ick that seems to be painted on OSR. Like, I don't know that that's, I think we can maybe work on convincing them that Call of Cthulhu is OSR also. And that's sort of maybe like just a separate arm of argument that I'd be getting on that. Yeah, so there are a ton of women who did early games and love the OSR aesthetic. That's my impression. Yeah, frankly. Eric Bloat's just good, folks. I mean, his games are they're generally not to my taste as far as like how much genre they evoke, but aesthetically the books are very simple, and he is working on pulling people into different genres. I like the 8-bit game that he's working on right now, sort of trying to take like 8-bit Nintendo gaming and bring some of that into the very simple white box kind of gaming space. So our McDude says Pathfinder 2 will be different, and it should be worth a look. I don't get the hate for it. It's for another video. That's what I have to say. It's impossible to be neutral. That neutrality is the same as agreement with. Well, yeah, and that's sort of the thing. Some people, yeah, I think that is. It would like that. That's basically the brush that Raggy's being painted with. Is that, you know, by saying that he doesn't hate Varg, he doesn't hate My Frog, he is now part of that, and like, I'm not gonna go over and hug James Raggy, and I'm not necessarily keen to publish stuff with him. And maybe I won't even give him money, but I'm not going to say that his game's terrible or that, you know, I'm not going to like scorched earth. And that's sort of the thing that is kind of awkward to me is just that somehow that's occurred, that, you know, because he did work with Zach, things have gone down that path. I don't know about that. It does seem like my son is waking up, and I think this stream is complete. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. OSR is Vintage Gaming. Have a good one.